The Dutch Shepherd hit the linoleum like something had been detonated. 85 pounds of working muscle, chest harness still reading K9 unit, shredding traction with every scramble while 3R techs pressed themselves against the walls of the intake corridor as though they'd collectively agreed the floor plan had changed. The handler came through the doors already losing. He was broad-shouldered, around 40, with the kind of posture you didn't develop at a gym. The kind the Army grew in you over years and then left as a permanent structure when everything else shifted. His hands were wrapped twice around a tactical leash, both arms working from the shoulder, and the dog was still pulling. Nobody in Bridger Valley Regional's emergency wing had seen anything like it. Most of them had backed away. That included Dr. Ramona Fisk, who was standing in the doorway of Bay 2 with her arms folded, and the expression of someone whose shift had already been difficult enough. The triage nurse behind the intake desk put down her pen. If this story already has you leaning in, stay with me until the very end, because what happens next is going to reach somewhere you didn't expect. Hit like, follow Midnight Nurse Letters, and drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Lark Osteen had worked triage at Bridger Valley for 4 years. The staff knew her as methodical, quiet, and reliable in the way that people who don't ask for credit often go unremarked until the moment they're the only one in the room who knows what to do. She was 32, medium build, dark hair she kept pinned back, and the kind of face that stayed neutral when other people's faces were doing complicated things, not because she didn't feel it, but because she'd been trained a long time ago to keep her center while everything around her came apart. Nobody at Bridger Valley knew about that training. It had never come up, and she had stopped correcting people's assumptions about her a long time ago. Fisk had called her by her last name twice that morning, once to redirect a chart she'd already corrected, once to tell her a lab result she'd already pulled had been pulled. That was ordinary. That was Tuesday. What wasn't Tuesday was the dog. Lark walked around the intake desk without hurrying. She moved toward the handler and the Dutch Shepherd at a pace she'd decided in the first 3 seconds was correct, and she didn't deviate. The handler saw her coming. His jaw tightened. He was working too hard with the leash to speak, but his eyes said, "Don't." She stopped 12 feet out. She didn't crouch. Didn't use the soft voice people used when they didn't understand an animal and were hoping sound alone would substitute for authority. She didn't extend a hand. She stood, weight even, breathing slow, and she looked at the dog directly for 2 seconds, then looked away, not submission, just calibration, and waited. The Dutch Shepherd's ears rotated toward her. The scrambling slowed. Not calm, still. There was a difference. And Lark knew it, and the difference told her something important about why this dog was here. She took 1 step forward, held, another. The dog watched her without the same coiled intensity it had aimed at everyone else. Something in its posture was reorganizing. She could see the left shoulder, the way weight redistributed away from it when the dog moved, almost imperceptibly, but there if you were looking for it. She pulled a piece of dried chicken from the pocket of her scrubs. She'd carried it since her 2nd week at Bridger Valley. The attending physicians thought it was eccentric. She kept it anyway. She placed it on the floor, slid it forward with her foot. The Dutch Shepherd looked at her, looked at the chicken, walked to it, picked it up, and stood there chewing with the deliberate patience of an animal that had just made a significant decision about a person. The intake corridor exhaled. "Get Dr. Abrams," Lark said to no one specific and everyone at once. She looked at the handler. "What's her name?" Full designation. He blinked. The effort of releasing the leash tension was visible in his shoulders. "Gail, retired MWD, now County K9, handler number." How long has she been favoring that left shoulder? A pause. The K9 trainer at the department said it was stress. She's been reassigned twice in 6 months. "How long?" Lark said. He pressed his mouth flat. 5, maybe 6 months. She looked back at the dog. "What's your name?" "Wulf. Sergeant First Class Dax Wulf, retired. Deputy now." He said it with the automatic precision of someone who'd introduced himself by rank 10,000 times and hadn't entirely stopped. Gail's been my partner since she mustered out, 3 years. I've never seen her go sideways like this. She's in pain, Lark said. Not a comfort. A statement, not stressed, in pain. The aggression is the pain. Come on. Dr. Abrams arrived 7 minutes later and immediately wanted sedation. Lark expected that. She's a working dog in active distress, Abrams said to the room in general. We sedate, we stabilize, then we assess. Sedation dosage needs current weight, not file weight, Lark said. She's lost mass in the last 2 months. Look at the hip definition. And sedating before we know what we're dealing with structurally means she comes out of it in more pain and less cooperative, which creates a different problem entirely. Abrams looked at her with the expression of a man who had been told no by a nurse and found the experience novel. She's triage, Fisk said from the doorway. I know what I am, Lark said, still even, and right now I'm the only person that dog is tolerating near her, so let me do a manual assessment first. If she won't hold, we sedate. But let me try. She paused. Your call. Abrams looked at Fisk. Fisk looked at Gail, who had turned slightly when Abrams raised his voice. Do the assessment, Abrams said. Lark was already moving. It took 22 minutes. Gail held through most of it. There were 2 moments where the lips pulled back and the body went rigid. Both times Lark stopped, waited, and the moment passed. Wulf stayed at the edge of the room with his hands loose at his sides, which she noticed because most people crossed their arms when they were anxious. And the fact that he didn't meant he'd spent enough years in enough situations where keeping his hands available mattered. When she found it, she didn't say anything immediately. She worked her fingers along the left shoulder and down the cervical attachment point, felt the asymmetry that wasn't supposed to be there, watched Gail's response. The dog didn't pull away. She leaned into the pressure, which was worse than pulling away, because it meant she'd been bearing this long enough that she'd learned to need it. I need the K9 program records from the state veterinary contractor, Lark said, the last formal health certification, and I need our own imaging. Wulf pulled out his phone. I can request the transfer. Do that, but we run our own. She looked at Abrams. There's asymmetric tension along the left cervical spine, C6 to C7 range. She braces against it rather than guarding away from it, which means it's structural, not soft tissue. The certification from 6 months ago said she was clear. Then it was clear, Abrams said. The certification said it was clear, Lark said. The distinction sat in the room quietly, the way a stone sits when it's been dropped into still water. Abrams pushed off the wall. Run imaging. I'll read it myself. The films came back 90 minutes later. Abrams stood at the lightboard for a long time. Lark stood beside him, not touching anything, watching the images in the way he was watching them. The state contractor's certification films were on the left. Bridger Valley's films were on the right. The lesion was visible in Bridger Valley's imaging the way a hairline fracture becomes visible when the light angle changes. Left cervical, C6, with secondary degeneration at the joint surface. Stress patterning consistent with ongoing weight bearing through an unaddressed injury. It was not new. It was not borderline. That's been there for. Abrams started. At minimum 6 months, Lark said. The secondary degeneration pattern suggests longer. The contractor's certification either missed it or the films were read as clean when they weren't. That's a significant thing to say. It's a significant finding. Wulf had come into the imaging room. He'd heard all of it. His voice, when he spoke, had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet Lark recognized as what happened to people like him when they got extremely close to something they didn't have words for yet. Who certified Gail 6 months ago? State K9 veterinary contractor, Abrams said. Harmon Canine Services. They handle health certification for county and state K9 units across 4 states. Lark said nothing, but her jaw tightened, and she turned back to the lightboard before either of them could read what crossed her face. She'd heard that name before, 9 years ago in a different state, in a different life. The federal investigators arrived at Bridger Valley the next morning. 2 of them, a woman named Agent Gretel, early 50s, with the specific tiredness that came from running a long case, and her partner, Agent Nowak, younger, quieter, the kind of quiet that was professional rather than personal. They asked for Lark by name, not the triage nurse by name. Gretel sat across from her in the small conference room off the main hall. Nowak stayed near the door with a tablet. Lark Osteen, Gretel said. Formerly Specialist Osteen, 68W Combat Medic, attached to Operational Detachment Alpha 361, classified deployment 2015 through 2019. Lark kept her face even. It took effort, not because Gretel had surprised her. She'd known, at some level, since the moment Abrams said Harmon Canine Services and she'd turned from the light board. Things like this had a gravity. Once you recognized the shape of them, you understood they'd been pulling toward you all along. But hearing her own name said that way, the rank, the unit number she hadn't spoken aloud in 9 years, was something she hadn't fully prepared for. "You've reopened something," she said. Gretel put a folder on the table. "We've been running a joint investigation with the DoD Inspector General's Office and Army CID for 11 months. The focus is K9 unit medical clearance documentation. Specifically, animals certified as operationally fit when their own veterinary records indicated otherwise." She paused. "Your name appeared in our evidence trail because of Gail, and because of a complaint filed in 2016 by Specialist Lark Osteen to the commanding officer of ODA 361 regarding falsified veterinary clearance documents for 2 working dogs assigned to her care." She opened the folder. Inside was Lark's own handwriting, photocopied, 9 years old. "A complaint," Gretel said, "that was reviewed, classified, and closed with no action taken." Lark looked at the paper. "3 weeks after I filed it," she said, "I was transferred to a forward support role. 7 months after that, I was separated on administrative grounds. There was nothing administrative about it." "We know," Gretel said. "Then why are you here 9 years later?" Gretel held her gaze. "Because Gail's imaging matches a pattern we've been documenting for 2 years. 11 animals in the last 5 years with certified clearances that didn't match their clinical presentation. 3 were injured in the field. 1 was euthanized for behavioral issues that anyone looking at the imaging would recognize as pain response." She slid a second document across the table. "And because the company managing the K9 health certification contract for the Army and for 8 state law enforcement programs over the past 11 years has a name you know." Lark looked at the document. Harmon Canine Services, founder and CEO Victor Pel. She'd known him when he was a procurement officer attached to her unit. She'd known him when he'd found her outside the operations center 3 days before her complaint and told her, with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this before, that filing paperwork against the certification program would be a serious miscalculation. She'd known him when he'd smiled and said nobody in the chain of command was going to prioritize the word of a junior medic over a functioning contract. He'd been right about the chain of command. He'd been wrong about everything else. "He's running the certification program," she said. "For 11 years, federal contract, renewable. Every K9 clearance in 4 Army divisions and 8 state programs runs through Harmon's veterinary staff." Lark set the document down. She was very still. "What do you need from me?" "Documentation," Gretel said, "from 2016, if you kept anything." Lark looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Nowak by the door. The careful expression of someone standing very close to a door they'd been trying to open for a long time. "I need to think about how I answer that," she said. Gretel nodded. She gave Lark her card, stood, extended her hand. "We're in Rimrock through Friday." After they left, Lark sat in the conference room for 9 minutes. Then she finished her charting. She drove home at 6:40. She lived 20 minutes outside Rimrock in a small house on a flat stretch of high plains where the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. She'd chosen it deliberately. In the back of her bedroom closet, behind a fireproof box holding her rental agreement and nursing license, was a smaller box, older, with a combination lock she hadn't opened since she'd moved to Montana 3 years ago. She stood in front of it for a moment. Then she went to make coffee, because some decisions didn't get made in 30 seconds no matter how long they'd been waiting. She sat at the kitchen table and thought about Gail, about the way the dog had leaned into the pressure at her cervical spine rather than pulling away. The particular patience of an animal that had learned to live inside the pain because no one had labeled it correctly. She thought about the certification that said clear when the imaging said otherwise. She thought about 11 animals over 5 years. She thought about Victor Pel's smile. She finished the coffee, washed the cup. She went back to the closet and opened the box. She hadn't destroyed any of it. She'd known, without ever saying it plainly, that destroying it would mean accepting that it hadn't mattered. She wasn't built that way. So she'd carried it through 2 duty stations, 1 discharge, and 2 cross-country relocations. A reinvention thorough enough that the people at Bridger Valley would not have recognized the woman in the unit photographs. The box held printed field logs, veterinary assessment sheets with her handwriting alongside correction marks in a different hand, a USB drive, 2 photographs, and a copy of the complaint she'd filed in 2016. Received, reviewed, closed, the final notation in red ink with a signature she'd memorized and never forgotten. She photographed every item with her phone before she touched anything. Her hands were steady. She noted that and was quietly grateful for it. Then her phone buzzed, unknown number. You should think very carefully, Lark. Some things are better left where they are. She read it twice, screenshotted it, forwarded it to Gretel's number with 1 line. Someone knows I'm talking to you. The reply came in under 3 minutes. Don't go anywhere tonight, sending someone to your address. She looked around the kitchen, got up, checked the front door, the back door, the 2 main room windows, sat back down and kept working because the alternative was to stop. And stopping was what they'd always counted on her doing. At 11:20 p.m., headlights swept across the window and she heard gravel, 3 spaced knocks, Miss Osteen, Agent Nowak. She confirmed through the side window and opened the door. Nowak came in with a second agent she introduced as Farber, quiet in the professional way, who did a perimeter check without being asked. Nowak looked at the kitchen table, documents laid out in ordered rows, phone propped recording a video log, archival sleeves stacked to one side, and said, "You've been working this whole time." "I told Gretel I needed until morning," Lark said. "I didn't say I'd stop." They worked until 1:30 a.m. Nowak photographed each document with a forensic imaging setup, while Lark narrated provenance and context for each item. The audio recording on the USB drive was transferred, verified, and cross-referenced against the threatening text she'd received that evening. Nowak listened to the recording twice with her eyes closed, which Lark recognized as the technique of someone checking for voice pattern consistency without visual distraction. At 1:15 a.m., Nowak looked up. The 2016 recording will need chain of custody documentation from the original capture device. "I have the recorder," Lark said, "in the box, batteries removed so it wouldn't corrode." She paused. "I also have the purchase receipt dated 2 weeks before the conversation. I wasn't planning anything when I bought it. I just developed a habit in my 3rd year attached to ODA of recording anything that felt off." What made that particular conversation feel off? Lark was quiet for a moment. "He told me my career was over, and he said it like he was discussing the weather." People delivering professional warnings don't usually sound that settled. People who already know the outcome do. Nowak wrote something down in a small paper notebook, the old-fashioned kind that didn't sync to any cloud. Lark noticed that too. She slept 3 hours on the couch. She was at Bridger Valley by 5:45. Gail's morning vitals were her first obligation. The dog was more alert than the night before, tracking movement from the kennel floor, lifting her head when Lark came in. Lark sat on the floor beside the kennel door and ran through the chart while Gail pressed her nose to the back of Lark's hand and held it there. Wulf arrived at 7:90. He'd clearly slept in his truck. "She tried to stand this morning," Lark said when she found him in the hallway. "That's actually good, means pain management is working well enough that her brain is outrunning her body. We need to hold her back for the first week. Don't let her get ahead of the recovery." Wulf nodded. He looked at Gail through the kennel window with the expression of a man who had spent years in situations where caring about something was a tactical liability and had arrived, somehow, at caring about something anyway and was wearing the helplessness of it badly. "You look like you slept outside," Lark said. I was parked down the block from your house, he said without inflection. The agents were there. I wasn't going to interfere. I just wanted to be close in case something went sideways. She looked at him. I didn't ask you to do that. No. He held her gaze. I know what Pel's capable of. Seems like you do too. She let it sit for a moment. Go get real breakfast. Gail's not going anywhere. Neither are the next 12 weeks. The escalation came at 10:15. Fisk found Lark at the supply station and told her, in the measured tone she used when a decision had already been made and she wanted it to feel like a conversation, that the hospital had received a request from the legal representative of Harmon Canine Services for Gail's imaging records and surgical files for independent review. That request goes through Dr. Abrams, Lark said. He's the attending of record. I'm the medical director. I have the authority to authorize release in the context of a legal proceeding. It's not a legal proceeding yet. It's a request from a law firm representing a party under federal investigation. Lark kept her voice level. Releasing those records before the federal subpoena arrives would compromise the chain of evidence. If I'm wrong, the delay costs you one day. If I'm right, releasing them now costs this hospital its role in a federal prosecution. Fisk stared at her. How do you know whose team it is? Because no one else involved in Gail's case has a reason to want independent imaging review right now. Lark paused. Does the attorney's letter name Inspector General's office? Fisk looked at the document in her hand. It references an active investigation. Then call the hospital attorney before you do anything. Confirm the request is legally obligated, not just requested. She held Fisk's gaze. One day is the cost of being careful. Fisk looked at her for a long moment with an expression that had shifted. Less the flat authority of a woman, certain of her position, more the look of someone who had been moving through a situation thinking she understood it and had just been handed a piece that didn't fit. She walked back to her office without another word. Lark texted Gretel at 10:30. Pel's legal team contacted the hospital requesting Gail's records. Medical director is holding pending counsel. You need to move faster. Reply in 4 minutes. Federal subpoena filed this morning. Should arrive by noon. Pel's attorney is named Hollins Bray. We know him. This confirms Pel is running scared. Running scared was not the same thing as stopped. She'd learned that distinction the hard way. Gretel called at noon and asked Lark to come to the field office. They'd set up above a tax preparation office on Commerce Street, the kind of location federal investigators used when they didn't want to be visible in a hotel. She said she'd be there at 1:09. 4 people in the main room when she arrived. Gretel, Nowak, Farber, and a fourth, a woman named Special Agent Drummond from the Army CID side of the joint operation, with the brisk manner of someone who'd been building this case longer than anyone else in the room and had no patience for backtracking. Arrest warrants are being filed today, Gretel said before Lark had fully sat. Pel and 2 others, a retired Army colonel named Stave Linwood, who served on the DoD Contracting Oversight Board, and a current certification administrator named Heloise Rand, who's been processing the falsified approvals for 7 years. She put photographs on the table. Pel was older than Lark remembered, mid-50s now, with the softness of someone who'd spent a decade behind a desk rather than in the field. She'd expected something sharper seeing his face. What she felt instead was something precise and functional, the completion of a calibration. When? End of business today, or first thing tomorrow, depending on how fast the warrants clear. Drummond leaned forward. We need you accessible and in place. No travel, nothing that disrupts contact. I'm not going anywhere. The U.S. attorney wants to know if you're prepared to testify, Gretel said. Grand jury and potentially trial. She'd known that was coming since she'd opened the combination lock. Yes, she said. Drummond made a note. She drove back to Bridger Valley with 11 minutes to spare. The second escalation came at 3:40. Perry, one of the intake techs, 23, and still young enough that bad news showed on his face before he could compose it, came to find Lark at the triage desk. A man in the lobby was asking for her by name, had left a card. The card read Hollins Bray, attorney at law. On the back, in handwritten ink, this doesn't have to be complicated for you. Call me. Tell him I'm unavailable, Lark said. If he asks when, refer him to hospital administration. She photographed the card, sent it to Gretel. Reply, do not engage. We're accelerating. Warrant should clear within the hour. She was finishing discharge paperwork on a lab mix that had come in 2 days ago when the front doors opened at 4:55 and Victor Pel walked in. Alone. No attorney, no intermediary. Just him in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, hands in his jacket pockets, the expression of a man who had decided that direct was his only remaining option. His eyes found her immediately, which meant he'd known exactly where to look. Lark, he said, like it was a professional conference, like 9 years was a weekend. She set her pen down. She did not stand up. Mr. Pel. She reached under the desk and pressed the staff alert button she and Perry had set up 3 months ago, a notification to the staff channel and both their phones. She'd installed it herself. She'd told Perry it was for difficult situations. She picked up her phone and typed to Gretel, "He's here in person. Front desk, Bridger Valley." Then she looked at Pel. "I need you to wait right there," she said. He took one step toward the desk. "I came to talk to you directly, without intermediaries, without," he gestured, small and dismissive, "all the noise." "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about." His voice stayed practiced and level. "Whatever Gretel has told you about where this investigation is going, federal cases of this scope don't move the way they're promising you they will. They stall. They get political. People who cooperate early think they're protected and then find themselves in the middle of something that doesn't end cleanly for anyone." He let that sit. "I've seen it happen to people better positioned than you." She looked at him. She thought about the box, about the USB drive, about an audio recording she'd made 9 years ago because his smile had told her she was going to need it. "You called me 2 days ago," she said. "You texted me. You sent your attorney to this building, and now you're here yourself." She held his gaze without blinking. "Every single one of those decisions is going to be in a federal record, Victor. And you just walked into a building with security cameras at the entrance and 4 staff members who watched you come through that door." She paused. "So I'll ask you again to wait right there." Something shifted in his face. Not much, just enough. The front door opened behind him. Agent Gretel came in, Nowak 2 steps back. The expression on Victor Pel's face in the moment between seeing them and reassembling himself into something composed was the first honest thing Lark had seen from him in 9 years. Gretel reached into her jacket. "Victor Pel, I have a warrant for your arrest." He didn't move for 3 full seconds. Lark watched it happen, the calculation running behind his eyes, the inventory of exits, the assessment of Nowak's position relative to the door. Old habits in a man who'd built his career thinking several moves ahead. Then he settled, and the settling looked almost like composure, which she supposed was the last thing a certain kind of person refused to surrender. "I'd like to call my attorney," he said. "You'll have that opportunity," Gretel said. She was already moving around the desk, with the economy of someone who'd done this enough times that it no longer felt significant. Wulf had come out of the K9 wing. He stood at the far end of the corridor, with his arms at his sides, watching as Pel was cuffed and walked toward the door. He said nothing. That took more control than most people would have managed. Pel passed the triage desk on his way out. He didn't look at Lark. That was a choice, and she understood it. Looking at her would have required him to concede something, and he wasn't ready for that. Maybe never would be. Some people didn't. The door closed. Perry said carefully, "Was that did they just?" "Yes," Lark said. She picked up her pen. "I need to finish this discharge chart." Gretel called at 6 to confirm Pel was in federal custody. Linwood had been taken simultaneously at his home in Denver. Heloise Rand had been arrested at her office in Raleigh by a separate team coordinated by Drummond. 3 arrests, 3 cities inside a 40-minute window. The kind of operational precision that told Lark this had been staged for days, and the warrants had been the last piece. She finished the discharge paperwork. She ran Gail's evening vitals. She sat with the dog for a few minutes on the recovery room floor, Gail's chin on her knee, both of them quiet in the particular way of creatures that had made a decision about each other and were at ease with the weight of it. The call she hadn't fully prepared for came 8 days later. Unknown number. Just past 7 p.m. She answered anyway, because she'd been answering unknown numbers all week, and by now the risks she could see clearly were less frightening than the ones she couldn't. "Is this Lark Osteen?" A woman's voice, older, steadied by long practice. "It is." "My name is Dorothy Payne. My son, Corporal Nathan Payne, was a canine handler. His dog was Sorrow." A breath. "She died in the field in 2021. We were told it was the operational environment, that she just broke down." Lark pulled to the shoulder of the road. She'd read Sorrow's name in the federal records Gretel had shared 2 days after the arrests. Case number 7. Cervical degeneration, certified clear 6 weeks before deployment, the certification bearing Harmon Canine Services seal on every page. "Nathan saw it happening," Dorothy said. "He told his CO that something wasn't right with her. They told him she needed behavioral adjustment. They told him she was fine." Her voice stayed even with the sustained effort of someone holding something that had been living in a specific shape for years and had just been told it could be a different shape now. The story this week. About the company and the woman who filed a complaint years ago that they buried. Another breath. "I've been making calls all afternoon. I think you knew Sorrow." "I knew her name," Lark said, "and I documented what was wrong. I filed a complaint because what I found wasn't in her official record." Silence on the line. "Was she in pain when they deployed her?" Lark closed her eyes for 1 second. "Yes," she said, "I believe she was." The sound Dorothy Payne made was small and controlled and devastating, the sound of a grief that had been held in one shape for 4 years and had just been given permission to change. "Thank you," she said, "for not putting it down." Lark sat on the shoulder of the road with the Montana dusk coming in flat and dark all around her and held the phone until Dorothy said goodbye. Then she sat for 4 more minutes before she trusted herself to drive. The sentencing came 7 months later, federal court in Billings. Pel pleaded guilty in month 4, the calculation of a man trying to minimize what he could still minimize. He received 17 years. The judge cited the systematic nature of the scheme, the deliberate suppression of 2 separate whistleblower complaints filed 9 years apart by 2 different people who had noticed the same wrong thing and been handled the same way, the documented harm to 14 animals over 11 years, and the witness intimidation charges, the texts, the calls, the attorney sent to her workplace, the personal appearance at the ER desk, which added 3 years to the baseline. Linwood received 13, Rand received 6, reduced for substantial cooperation. Lark sat in the gallery with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and when the number was read, she looked at Pel across the room. He didn't look back. She understood why. He'd spent 9 years building a file on her and had never once predicted what she'd actually do. Looking at her now would have required him to understand why, and she didn't think he was capable of that. Some people weren't, at the end. Outside on the courthouse steps afterward, Gretel found her. "How do you feel?" she said. Lark thought about it honestly, like it's done and not done at the same time. "That's about right," Gretel said. "The 14 animals, the families, civil proceedings are being filed." "Yes. It won't give them back what they lost." "No," Gretel said, "it won't." The low Montana sun was pushing long shadows across the street below the courthouse steps. Somewhere behind them, the heavy doors were still moving. "It's still right that it happened," Lark said. "It just doesn't fix the thing that can't be fixed." Gretel didn't argue. She understood that Lark wasn't asking her to. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday, Lark walked into Bridger Valley's small exterior courtyard and found Gail already there. Wulf on one end of a training lead, a rehabilitation specialist named Joelle Tran on the other, both of them watching as the Dutch Shepherd moved through a controlled pattern at a pace that was not hesitant, not compensating, not the careful redistribution of weight around something that hurt. Just moving. Just a dog working the way she was built to work, her whole body in it. Wulf looked up when Lark came in. "She's good," he said, not a question. "She's good," Lark said. He studied her for a moment. 6 weeks of daily visits had moved them past the careful distance of the first days into the functional trust of people who'd been through something together. Not simple. Something more specific than that. What about you? He said. What happens now? She considered it. I applied for the clinical coordinator position. Fisk offered it 2 weeks ago. She paused. The salary's different. The work is more accurate to what I actually know how to do. And the other thing, the DoD working group. She'd told him about that 3 days ago, sitting on the courtyard floor while Gail slept across both their feet. I think I'm going to say yes, she said. It's not the same as what I filed in 2016. It doesn't undo any of it, but it comes after it, and I think that matters. He nodded slowly. He looked back at Gail, who had slowed from her pattern and come to stand beside him, pressing her shoulder against his knee with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had figured out how to feel safe again. She trusted you from the first day, he said, from the moment you put that piece of chicken on the floor. Why? Lark thought about how to say it accurately. I think she knew I wasn't going to tell her she was fine when she wasn't. She looked at the dog. Animals understand that faster than people do. Most people would have stayed behind the desk. Most people did, Wulf said. That's how it gets to 14, Lark said. That's how it always gets that far. Gail turned her head and looked at Lark with the calm, unhurried attention of an animal that had made its decision about a person a long time ago and had no plans to revisit it. Lark looked back. She didn't think about the sentence, or the testimony, or the consulting role, or the new position, or any of the machinery that had been set in motion and would keep turning long after today. She thought about Dorothy Payne saying thank you for not putting it down. She thought about what it meant to carry something for 9 years, not because it was noble, but simply because she was not built to set it down. And she watched Gail run,